Okay. All right. So, okay, I think we're live now.
Okay.
All right. Hey, everyone. Welcome to the Bigger Picture podcast. I'm Dylan, and this is Matt. And we're going to talk a little bit about a couple different issues, a lot of which geopolitically, we're going to talk about Russia and the Ukraine. And I do want to start with some domestic issues that are going on today, a lot going on. And it appears that Elon Musk may or may not be stepping down from Twitter based on a poll he said he would abide by certain results, that he would think about possibly stepping down. I'm not sure if he's done his duty or maybe he's gone too far, but that's what we're seeing today. And I also wanted to talk a little bit about some videos that have been going viral with our safe and effective program, as the media likes to promote and many celebrities like to promote. And in particular, Gene Simmons had a few words with, I believe, Sky News recently while he was in Las Vegas. And I wanted to go ahead and play this video for us, which I have right up here. This is on Twitter. And I'm going to go ahead and post this on the screen. Let's see. And let's go ahead and play this video right here. So he was actually on Good Morning Britain. And I just want to say something that Kiss was never really popular much. I mean, they were, while they were very popular, I mean, at least in their heyday, they weren't a very good band. I mean, their theater was really good, but their music was not very good. But they coined a slogan that I'm not sure if they were one of the first, but at least one of the first to popularize it. And they said, "Question authority." And here is Gene Simmons, 50 years later, basically going completely against what he claimed he believed in. And there's also a tweet that I do want to show right after this that shows his hypocrisy even more. So why don't we go ahead and play this.
So get over yourself. We're not concerned if you agree with it or not. We're concerned about you making us sick. So get your goddamn COVID shot and prevent other people from getting your stuff.
It's a good point, and we're having a debate this morning about that very thing, really. A debate about whether mask wearing should be returned to be mandatory here in the UK. Restrictions have been lifted. And I understand you even suggest people who come to your concerts wear them for their own protection.
We are doing the KISS cruise shortly, and you will not be able to get on the cruise unless you're vaccinated. Look, before you go to school, you have to have your children get the flu vaccine and the polio vaccine, and there's no discussion. And, what about my rights? Well, you don't have as many rights as you think. When you get up to a red light, you must stop. There's no choice. It's because it's not about you. It's about the other innocent people going by. So get over yourself. Even you get in your car, you must put on a seatbelt. Well, you're taking away my rights, and the government's telling me what to do. That's right. The government is telling you what to do. Shut up, be respectful of other people, and get a vaccine. Put on your seatbelt, stop at the red light, stop being selfish.
So I wonder, why right now at this point, while we're seeing all the adverse reactions and deaths all around, they're trying to make us believe, people just die suddenly for no reason whatsoever, or getting children getting myocarditis, that's just something normal. And yet we have celebrities here, and this is just one, I'll play another one, promoting it, just to kind of, I feel like just to kind of cover up what's going on. So what do you think is going on?
Well, it does seem ironic that these alleged anti-authoritarian rock and rollers would be so pro-government and government mandates, right? Um, you know, look, if we really felt confident that the vaccines were safe and effective, and we also didn't already know that COVID only, even according to the most conservative estimates, is only affects a very tiny proportion of the population and is typically not a deadly disease. You don't take the kind of measures that our government has taken and governments around the world to limit people's freedom, to make them take an experimental gene therapy with unforeseeable results. Information's pouring out about how dangerous it can be for blood clotting and heart attacks and all these sudden deaths that we're seeing. And that's not conspiracy theory. That's really happening. Who knows whether this was part of a depopulation agenda or not. Maybe the intentions were good, maybe they were not. But for Gene Simmons to tell everyone that basically you're a bad person if you don't get the vaccine and that you're endangering other people's lives for something that is very, very rarely fatal. It's got a 99.7% survival rate for most of the population. If it's what we're told it is, and there's doubts about that. So I think it takes a lot of chutzpah for him to make statements like that.
Yeah, and I mean, I just think that these people are being paid, to promote it. I don't think that they really believe in it. It's possible that these celebrities have possibly not even taken it. I just think they're shilling out for the system because either, big pharma, has a lot invested in the media in Hollywood. So it's pretty easy for these celebrities to go ahead and promote it if it helps them get more attention, more popularity. And just to draw another example, I mean, let's look at Sean Penn, who is kind of a washed up actor. Whoops. Oh, sorry. Sean
Wait,
Penn
can I just, Dylan, before you switch to Sean Penn, can I just say something for a second on what you just said? I think a lot of times these celebrities are not as different in a lot of ways from everybody else, and they don't always know for sure what's going on. And you have these people that have been very successful, at least financially, in their lives. They don't want to jeopardize that. And I think a lot of them are genuinely scared of getting what they think is potentially fatal disease and, destroying this wonderful life that they've had as a famous rock star or famous actor and whatnot. So I don't necessarily think somebody, I mean, I tend to doubt more that maybe that, it's not like Simmons knows it's all fake and, he's paid to play along, in a sense he is, because if he goes against the narrative, which is that you must take the vaccine and that you're helping your fellow man by doing that, if he comes out against that, he could get blackballed and lose millions and millions of dollars in concert engagements and merchandise sales and all that kind of stuff. So they don't want to risk that. So I'd say it's that and genuine fear of premature death,
Right. I could see that for sure.
Yeah. That's my guess. right?
Yeah. No, I definitely think that's very well possible. You know, because I always think of the reasons why they promote it so heavily, and that's definitely one of the sources
Well,
of
I
it.
think they believe in the system as it is because they've benefited from the system. And hey, you know, like, yeah, their music, like Kiss, their music is not that great, but you know, I take my hats off to them for the longevity and you know what they've been able to accomplish in a very shady music business. You know, good for them. I'm sure that in many aspects they're good people, but you know, when you've benefited by the system, you tend to go along with the system,
Yeah, I definitely agree.
you don't
Absolutely.
want to kill the golden goose.
Right. No, for sure. Yeah, and I mean, I just think, what I get absolutely repulsed by is when they make the unvaccinated out to be, these killers or criminals, basically, just, for not wanting to get an experimental concoction. I mean, you can have your personal beliefs about it, but, when you start um attacking one group just because of what their personal choices are, that's just, to me, not a good look for you as a celebrity or as an actor. For a lot of, I mean, not maybe you know not just the unvaccinated, but I think even moderates, people who are vaccinated, that believe in choice. And this was another clip from Sean Penn.
Yeah,
This
it's
is
not
from,
being selfish, it's using common sense.
yeah, exactly. And this was from August of last year, and it just recently went viral because a tweet that he made, and I'll bring this up right here. Um, yeah. So he says here, anecdotally, I'm told that not only are the vaccines safe and totally safe, but they also help burn weight, healthier and slimmer in one shot. So he's just like, this very like openly pro-vax person. I mean, look, if you really want to believe in that, like, that's on you. But what really pissed me off is when he goes ahead and says this about the unvaccinated.
What goes through your mind when you hear a lot of the anti-vaccine rhetoric?
It's a cowardice of conviction. I think that it is an unwillingness to engage in a culture of common sense, that at this point it seems criminal to me. Actually, I really feel that that if someone chooses not to be vaccinated, that they should choose to stay home, not go to work, not have a job, not go to work, not have a job.
Hell no, to the no, no.
You have a very, very hard time convincing people that what you're doing is right and that you're really smart.
So that was just a little meme that I added at the end. But he's telling us that we're criminals, that we shouldn't be able to leave our homes, that we shouldn't be able to participate, go to work, or any of that. Like, to what, like, I wonder, if that's something that he
That's going
personally,
beyond.
yeah. Like, is that something that he personally believes, or is he just so ashamed maybe that he got this shot, and he prefers that other people make that same mistake? He wants everybody to do something just as stupid as him. I don't know.
I mean, look, he's an actor, he's an influencer.
Yeah.
Like, they don't have to pay him for it to be to his benefit to
Right.
not only parrot the mainstream narrative, but to even push it beyond what you might see typically, like on a news broadcast. I mean, so that just means that all the doors will stay open to him. And at this
Yeah.
point, that's typically, these people just don't want to be blackballed. So they have to make sure that they come out on the right side, right? Because, I mean,
Yeah.
they already have tons of money. So they don't need to be paid to do that.
I guess
But, you know,
that's,
I think it's an unwritten rule, you know. I mean, who knows how many might be, you know, paid by Pfizer or something. I mean, certainly, you know, like Pfizer is, if you watch any sporting event or you watch Fox News, you know, Pfizer is always like one of the sponsors, right? So, I mean, they're sponsoring everything, right? But still, a successful actor or a musician like Gene Simmons, you know, they don't need the money as much as they just need not to have opportunities for themselves shut down because they they said the wrong thing.
right. Yeah. No, definitely. I think that's a very good point. And, you know, I mean, I think like the lesson here is that, you know, it's like, you know, what we're seeing more and more in this day and age is that the celebrities that we used to idolize, that we really used to think had better lives than us, we just see how much they, you know, are really slaves and in a prison of their own sins. They don't really, you know, I mean, first of all, you know, being famous, it's like as it is, it's like you don't really have your privacy or your personal life anymore. And then on top of that, it's like, you know, just trying to maintain these appearances and sell and just being sellouts. Like it doesn't make me idolize celebrities at all. And then when you see all of their, you know, connections to pedophilia and satanic behavior within Hollywood, within the music industry, and, you know, it's like, who wants to really be a part of that? So part of this, a great awakening, is like letting go of all these false idols who have really just sold out, I think. And we can't really be, I think it's like with any celebrity or idol, even if it's somebody that you really support or, you know, actually have really good values, you know, we can't, you know, at the end of the day, we can't depend on idolizing anymore, you know.
Well, that's for sure.
Yeah.
You don't want to idolize anybody. You know, I would say, you know, put your faith in God, not in man, right?
Exactly.
And you know, when, again, going back to a similar point, when these celebrities have enjoyed so much success by playing by the rules of the system, for them, they would tend to worship man and their own power to change reality than to grant their existence to God, right?
Exactly.
So they fall for all the trappings of the material world and man, and it's encouraged for the people at large, to do the same, to worship celebrities, to forget that God exists, to think that this pop culture is more important than their own families and time-honored traditions.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yep. I think it's, you know,
and of course, this science as they describe it, not real science with real experiments and real debates, but whatever scientists say is true becomes the authority,
yeah.
even if it's not actually scientific.
Yeah. Yeah. And as long as it's coming from, you know, these voices and these personalities that have, you know, that are considered the professionals and the experts, people will just listen to them no matter what. And if
right.
you question those like even if you were to question somebody like Gene Simmons, you're accused of promoting misinformation, or something, that you're, and because at least Gene Simmons is listening to what professionals and experts are saying to all of us. So it's really crazy.
He's not actually using common sense, and Sean Penn isn't actually using common sense.
Yeah.
If they think about, what we're told COVID actually is and how rarely it actually affects people.
Yeah. And, why, should we listen to, the opinions of people that have no expertise in that field whatsoever? And I just think what Gene Simmons said in this recent video is totally contradictory to something he said a few years ago when he was commenting on how celebrities are always voicing their political opinions. And this is what he said. Put this right here. He says that I think celebrities should basically shut their pie holes and do what they do best. Act, sing, tap dance, juggle balls, and do all that kind of stuff. And when I saw this video, I'm like, yeah, I completely support that. Like, I thought it was a time when I was like, wow, I could actually get behind what he's saying. But then, all this COVID stuff happens, and then he turns into a complete hypocrite and becomes, the voice for, promoting the vax and being, having the expert scientific opinion. And that's, I think he should have just stuck to what what he preached. So
Do we know when he made this statement? Like what year that was?
I think this was definitely during the Trump presidency.
Okay.
And, I think a lot of these celebrities were coming out against Trump, and that's what his response was at the time.
So you think that, so you think he was referring to celebrities that were pro-Trump? Because there weren't many of those.
That were anti-Trump.
Oh, that were anti. So he was pro-Trump?
I don't know. That's the thing. I mean, maybe I don't know if he was, but I think what he was trying to say is that, all this anti-Trump stuff that Hollywood is promoting is really just taking away from what celebrities and what actors do best, which is just to entertain. And
yeah, because he could see, I guess, that this was not helping them.
No,
like,
and
it was making them just look like partisan hacks, but then with COVID, they just jumped on that. And because the dividing line was very much partisan, that there was a lot more Democrat voters that were pro-vaccine versus Republicans and independents who were a much larger percentage of them were skeptical or were against it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, the purpose of entertainment is to get away from all the, the
distract.
It's a distraction, and it's there to get away from politics and all the stuff that, depresses us and gets us angry, and it has its time and its place. Obviously, they want to distract people as much as possible, like that helps the system. But it's like, I think entertainment and enjoying what, the art that actors and filmmakers can create, I think has its value. But when you start injecting politics into it, it just ruins it, I think. But
so he knew that, but he couldn't help it.
Yeah. Yeah, pretty much. And I mean, and that he won't let anybody on the cruise who isn't jabbed. Like, that's just his own fascist segregationist stuff that he wants to
or paranoia,
do. Right.
hypochondria. Again, like
Yeah.
I can't help thinking that these guys, and they've been doing it for a long time, like they just don't want it to ever end, and they really feel like COVID could be the thing that just kills it, right? So
Mhm.
they're paranoid.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's fear, they're talking from fear.
They've definitely given into it. Yeah. And as a result, more of their followers get that, buy
Yeah, but
into that.
like think about it this way too, like they have a job to do, which is to perform, right? Just
Yeah.
like average Americans, a lot of them were afraid to speak out against mandatory masking and vaccines and COVID passes and all that because they were afraid they could lose their jobs, right? I mean, with
Yeah.
average Americans, they could be, not able to pay their mortgages or their rent or, so like really it was more serious than these performers. But at the same time, for the performers, it could cost them millions of dollars to be on the wrong side.
Sure. Right.
So everybody was afraid, or at least, was made to, but the attempt was made to get people to feel afraid, whether they were afraid or not. But I think every single person could tell a story of, of difficulty within their own families, whether it was, what to do at work, how far were they willing to go, like even to the point of, maybe some people who were on the fence about it, they just weren't confident enough in their own ability to discern, what was best for their own health, and they gave in and got the shot,
Yeah. Yeah. And now,
and some of them, I'm sure, regret it. And, I don't think there's anybody who didn't get the shot who regrets not getting it. That's
yeah.
the irony. Like, I don't
Yeah.
think there's anybody, I mean, you would think there
Not a
would be
single
some,
one.
like, oh, I didn't get it. And then boom, they die of COVID. But I don't know. I don't hear of anybody unvaccinated dying of COVID.
Yeah.
Not like anybody I know or heard about. And I know there's always going to be like stories about that, like, but I don't think they're verifiable.
Yeah.
And if they happen, they're really rare.
And there's just, a growing abundance of news articles on people just dying suddenly for no reason whatsoever, and like it's like we know what it's about. And I just think that the cover stories that they're trying to create are getting, obviously we don't want to laugh at people dying, but these headlines are just like laughably more and more ridiculous. I mean, one day it's like someone's dying because of climate change, or they're watching too much television at night and falling asleep. That they're saying that falling asleep in front of the TV can lead to early death, or that going out for long bike rides or stuff that like this can lead to early death. And I mean, this is something that came out just the other day with the new Avatar movie just coming out. Man dies of a heart attack while watching James Cameron's new film. And that apparently he was so out of just excitement over watching the film. This is in India, which I think is one of the most vaccinated countries right now. Just all of a sudden going into cardiac arrest at I guess at a movie theater, collapse inside of a movie theater all of a sudden. So it's just things like this that just make you go like, wow, like they have like this extensive team of, you know, fake news reporters just creating every possible excuse every time someone dies. It must be very difficult for them to keep up with this, is what I think. So
Yeah, I mean, that's the purpose of mainstream media, right? To reinforce narratives that
exactly.
that influence that affect behavior in the way that the system wants people to behave, you know, nudges them in the direction they want, persuades. That's why there's so much involvement of the intelligence agencies in mainstream media and big tech.
Exactly.
You know, as we've seen, you know, confirmed with the Twitter files, right? I mean,
Yep.
the FBI pretty much had a whole wing of Twitter, you know, for narrative control and, you know, to amplify messages that supported their views and mute alternative narratives, right?
Yeah,
It's all about narrative control.
exactly.
And
Exactly.
you know, there's no debate, and that's, you know, and the same goes for science. There's no real science going on insofar as, you know, real science is when someone makes a hypothesis based on actual observation, and it's provisional, and everybody's free to challenge that based on new evidence, and there's debate and disagreement, and you can disprove a theory or a hypothesis based on experimentation. That's not what we get. Do we ever get that? We're just told, here's what it is, you know, and
this is
you're
what
not, and
said.
even, you know, other scientists are not allowed to dispute it. I mean, they can do it, but they won't get published, and their message won't be heard, or they'll be demonized and so on, right?
Yeah.
And it's the same thing works with pretty much any subject that is important to the system.
Yeah. And it just never ends. It never ends as long as they have control over that part of our, you know, source of information, I think. And while we're on that subject, you know, we were before we get, you know, because I just want to finish off the domestic issues with this last topic before we get into the Ukraine stuff. So Elon Musk had a poll on Twitter recently asking if he should step down as the head of Twitter, and he says, "I will abide by the results of the poll." And we got 57% yes and 42% no. And then Elon just said, tweeted 2 hours ago, "I will resign as CEO as soon as I find someone foolish enough to take the job. After that, I will just run the software and servers teams." So if he were to step down, do you think that would change anything? Because I mean, as long as he's a shareholder, there's probably not much that would really change. And I think Twitter can continue to improve as a, you know, a new free speech platform. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah. Well, a few thoughts. One is that as soon as he launched the poll, there was a lot of chatter about him primarily doing that poll in order to capture more bots, right? Because so, you know, he expected that the numbers would be against him, but that would be because of the prevalence of bots, you know, that are against him. So so that was a way to flush them out, right? I think that's clever, right? And I kind of think that's true.
So it's really just a fake poll. It's not going to
he's tricking people, you know, which I applaud, because sometimes you just, you know, unfortunately, sometimes you have to be a little bit devious because your opponents are devious, and you know, it's the only way that you know, when they expect him to be 100% true to his word, then they might show their cards, right?
Right.
So
Right.
and his objective is to make Twitter a better experience, right? And it's better when you
Mhm.
don't have all these bot accounts, you know, like people with big money that can just, you know, create all these fake accounts and uh, create illusions, right?
Mhm. Yeah,
Um,
and I think you know, and like you know, and he's really making strides. I mean, you know, I mean, he recently suspended the accounts of certain reporters that were actually trying to dox him. And of course, like after that happened, you have the liberal media being like, see, he doesn't really care about free speech if he's going to censor his opposition. But I think he did it because they were actually trying to dox him, supposedly, which has been against Twitter policies for a while.
yeah, I think they were trying to dox him, and this is a pretty persistent practice of the left in doxing people that they feel are a threat to their narratives and um, um, you know, like libs of TikTok, I think was the big one with Taylor Lorenz, right?
Right, right.
Like she was really making them look bad just by showing their own clips,
Mhm.
and their response was to dox her so that, you know, it's a form of intimidation, right? So I think that whether or not these people that he temporarily suspended were were as were seriously were in complete violation, I guess they weren't completely, like, but I think that what he's trying to do is to send a message that doxing is unacceptable, you know, and
Right,
that,
right.
you know, so it was like a shot across the bow. And I think
Yeah,
that's effective, you know.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think
And
yeah.
it's not like a free speech issue per se. And
Mhm.
look, we're not going to have absolute free speech, and we probably shouldn't, you know. Like that example that's always said, like, you can't yell fire in a crowded theater, right? Like, that's
Mhm.
true. You don't want that to happen. And, you know, people who are saying, you know, I want to murder someone, or promoting pedophilia, or other things that are um, uh, you know, universally unacceptable, like, Twitter should be able to limit that, right? What I think what the problem was is that um, ever since the early days, you know, when it was more wide open, there was just, and especially since Trump came to office in particular, just the right and the left were not treated equally, right? The left could say anything, and the right could be banned for almost nothing if they just, you know, just for speaking the truth, right? Just for, you know,
Yeah,
having a narrative that was unpopular, that wasn't acceptable to the mainstream, you know, and that's why you had the involvement of the FBI and the intelligence agencies. You know, they were there to make sure that the messaging conformed to what the establishment wanted.
yeah, yeah, exactly.
And so it
Uh,
really wasn't about free speech as much as it was like, okay, just as long as the same rules apply to everybody.
mhm.
And, you know, let's get the intelligence agencies off the platform,
Yeah,
which I don't know how that'll work out, but, you know, I mean, you know, like, that that's risky, you know, who knows, I mean, I think Elon's genuinely afraid for his life, and which brings up an interesting point, like, you know, is Elon working for the system or not, you know? And I mean, there can be factions within the elite, and maybe he's in a
yeah,
faction that is saying, like, hey, this is just going too far. Like, I'm not down with depopulation, I'm not down with drag queen story hour. I'm not down with mandates or whatever it might be, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I do think it's, these elite families, you have to look that they all have different intentions, different objectives, and
It's not
you know,
homogenous.
yeah. So, the way that I've looked at, and I guess a similar argument could be made for Trump. I think that Trump and Elon, they represent a part of the structure that is very much against, a lot of these New World Order, globalist, psychopathic ideologies. And while they probably are concerned about maintaining their own power just as much as these other families, they recognize that they cannot be parasites, sucking the lifeblood out of America, where there's so many resources and so much, people that are thriving based on a system that actually works for everybody. And when you start destroying the traditions that this country was built upon, there's not going to be anything left for the people. All these globalist psychopaths, they really just want to suck up everything for themselves so that there's nothing left, and the population is under 1 billion or whatever it is they're trying to achieve. And you definitely have elite families that don't want that at all.
Yeah, and maybe, just like we were saying with Gene Simmons, right? Not to pick on Gene Simmons, but he's achieved a certain level of success. Life's been good for him. The system's been good for him, right? The system's been good for Elon too. And he sees
Sure.
that these psychopaths, like, they're like Wile E. Coyote, like they just can't help fucking with it, right? And in doing so, they're just going to blow everything up. Even though that may not be their intention, but they just end up destroying everything around them. And when they have global power, they could wreak global destruction, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So, and I think,
Yeah.
people like Elon, people like Trump, and others, who think similarly to them in that regard, like they don't want to see everything destroyed, and they also believe in the importance of national sovereignty,
Right.
and
Yeah.
that right, which these globalist, cosmopolitan, banker, financial types, like they don't care about that, and they don't.
No.
They're totally happy with one world government and elite city states, and the rest of the country could just be their little worker bees, and it would probably be more efficient if there were fewer people, fewer useless eaters.
Yeah.
And maybe someone like Elon and Trump and some others, they're just like, no, we don't want that. And actually, we may go down with that ship if that's what if that's the direction you're going to go. And if you look at everything that these people do, it always turns to shit. Like they always overreach and end up with unintended destructive consequences, including like their own demise. So like just give people like that enough rope and they'll eventually hang themselves, because they're just get drunk on power, and they lose their connection with the people, and they lose their connection with God,
Exactly.
and they don't appreciate beauty and spontaneity and human spirit and
Yeah. I think it's,
creativity.
they're setting themselves up to destroy themselves, really.
Yeah,
I
they
think,
really are.
yeah. And I think that one day will come, but when you see how easy it is for them to not be held accountable for their crimes, it's like,
That's right.
it's very easy to lose the faith that, you know, that truth will win, that good will win. It's, for at least for me, because, we've had a lot of a lot of wins recently, and I think that, you know, this past year that there's definitely been a lot of interesting change, and taking control of the House, like there's definitely certain things swinging in our favor lately. And some of, I mean, Sam Bankman-Fried being arrested. We're seeing, Twitter becoming more of a free speech platform. We're seeing milestones being made. Look at DeSantis, who might possibly make it illegal for people of a certain age to get a COVID shot, since he's investigating this stuff. So, and there's going to be investigations into Hunter Biden, into this election in Arizona. I just think, like, there is stuff happening, but it's like, we always see, a win being made for a little bit, and then it gets cut short because of a corrupt court system, or, there's always like these certain boundaries that the right just can't seem to get past in their battles. And that's, like, that's where I lose the faith. Like, apparently now there's like something on the Supreme Court docket to look at, how the election was certified on January 6th, and that it was falsely certified, that they're actually going to look into this. But it's like, like, I just feel like this is a case that's going to be tossed out. And like, I just see so much, excitement, especially, like, it might not be exactly just Q people, but like just conservatives in general, or people that, are very like strong Trump supporters that, that really want him to come back. Like, I just think they get really excited over these moments, and then they just don't really add up to anything at the end, like this video that Project Veritas did of the dean of a Chicago school, who admitted that, they hand out dildos and butt plugs to kids. Like, how come there's no criminal investigations into these things? Like, when that's not happening, like, what is it that we can hope for that will happen? I just, that's where I get really, sometimes just like,
I think I think the change, it's probably cliche, but it comes at the grassroots level, right? It's just individual people and families and communities who just decide that they're not going to abide by insane and immoral dictates from, their state government or federal government. They're gonna live in a sensible, faithful, familial way, and build on that, right? So
that's really all you can do, I think.
Yeah, I think that's really all you can do. Like, and eventually that will have ripple effects.
Yeah.
But the media, public education system, the political system, they're all traps for our attention, and to think that we can enact change that way, and it just never comes.
Yeah, I think that the goal is encourage, like, if you really want to see systemic change, you have to really encourage, you have to be a leader and encourage people to, help build that alternative system that you envision. And that's not easy for many people to do, but I think
and
that
just live the right way, live in a principled way, like the things that you and Carew were doing in your activism, that Like you didn't accept that, you didn't accept nonsense, you know.
Yeah,
And you were willing to, endure the slings and arrows.
right.
Right.
Definitely.
Yeah.
It's been a journey, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Well, perhaps we should
Can I
start
just say
getting,
just
yeah,
wrap up one thing that just comes to mind when
yeah,
we're talking about like the system and the way that it, so I think, so there's that, you do what you can at your individual, family, community level. And at the same time, you let evil destroy itself, right?
right.
So if you look at like the example from Lord of the Rings, right? There were two things that happened at the end, right? One that is that the all-seeing eye of Sauron was blind to what the little hobbits were doing and what Gollum was doing. You know, they were just forgotten, right? And that ended up destroying that blindness, right? Evil is blind, ended up destroying it. While at the same time with Gollum, at the end, he finally got the ring, the thing he had been pursuing his whole life, but it was a false idol. And just as he achieved his great victory of having gotten the ring back, he fell into the fire.
Exactly.
Right. So,
Yeah, that's a perfect analogy.
yeah. So I think that, we do what we can as individuals to be good little hobbits, right? Who are more powerful than they realize. And what does that mean? It means like being a good hobbit and having big families and honoring your community and having joy, right? And then letting evil destroy itself, because you can't really fight it head on.
And we can
Because
make fun of it.
because if you do, just like the elf queen had said, like, I can't take the ring because if I do, I would become another Sauron.
Right.
Because to fight evil corrupts you. So you don't fight it, you just be good.
Yeah, and we can make fun of the evil in the process too.
Yeah, and believe in good.
I've managed to find ways to do that too. So
to do what?
Well, I've managed to find ways to make fun of the evil in the process.
Oh yeah, right. Laugh at it. That's a great point. Like
yeah.
Don't be afraid to poke fun at it. They hate that because they don't have a sense of humor.
Exactly.
Hold a mirror up to it with humor.
Yeah. That can be the best remedy sometimes. So,
yeah, for sure. And it makes us feel good.
Yeah. For sure. Yeah. Well, I think yeah, I think that was definitely a good talk on some of the domestic issues and what the bigger picture is in that.
Yeah.
So maybe now we could get into the Russia-Ukraine stuff, and we're actually tomorrow Zelensky is arriving in the US Capitol to meet with Biden. I'm not too sure what that encounter is going to be about, but where we are with Russia and the Ukraine, since you seem to be following this pretty closely, what would you say now is prevalent with this conflict, and how is it affecting our country right now, and what hinges on this war?
Good questions. Yeah, it's interesting that Zelensky would come to the US in person because he hasn't been able to leave Ukraine since the war started. So
yeah, it's going to be his
just
first.
Logistically, it's interesting that they could manage to do that. And also, I actually wonder what his own people think of that. While they're under attack by the Russians for the last couple months, more or less, have been bombing civilian and military infrastructure in the country, which a lot of Russians complained from the beginning that Russia should have been doing this from the beginning. It would have made the war a lot easier for the Russian side, because the idea is that if you take out their infrastructure, it makes it very difficult logistically for the military. It makes it very difficult to resupply the troops, and so it would have made the battlefield a lot softer for Russian forces, right? But the reason the Russians didn't do that from the beginning was that they always saw the Ukrainians as brothers, even though the Ukrainians that were against Russia saw Russians as subhumans and were mortally opposed to them. So they constantly, going back to Lord of the Rings, they constantly refer to them as orcs, right? So a lot of the Ukrainian propaganda, if you just substitute the word Jews for Russians or Russians for Jews, you would get the same kind of rhetoric that you had against Jews during Nazi Germany times, right?
Right.
But the Russians didn't feel that way about the Ukrainians. So they thought that they would go in with a relatively small force, and their objective, they had three objectives: demilitarization, denazification, and liberation of the Donbass. The Donbass are the two regions, Lugansk and Donetsk, in the east that were primarily ethnic Russian, that sought autonomy from Ukraine after the coup, the US-sponsored coup in 2014, because they felt threatened by the change in government, that they were going to be persecuted, which they were. They weren't going to be able to use their language in the same way. There were massacres. They were afraid of being ethnically cleansed, because in Ukraine, for those who don't know, the western side is a predominantly Catholic and pro-Western, and the eastern side is predominantly Eastern Orthodox and ethnically Russian. So, and this happened when the Soviet Union disintegrated after 1989. The USSR basically granted autonomy to this region to Ukraine with the borders that we know it. But the problem was you had such a divide between East Ukraine and West Ukraine. It was very difficult for them to integrate, right? They did it, but there was always this conflict between those who want to be part of the EU and in the Western collective West American sphere versus those that wanted to be part of the Russian orbit. The thing is, it never made sense to fully leave the Russian orbit because they border Russia, you know? That'd be like saying we don't want to have relations with Canada and Mexico, you know, even though we share a border with them. Like, or let's say Mexico saying that we're cutting ourselves out of the American orbit. Well, that would be a disaster for Mexico, right? Because look at how would that affect their economy? Their economy would tank, right? Because, you know, when you have all these shared interests because you share a border, you can't decouple like that without destroying your economy. But the West made promises to Ukraine and said, you know, like, hey, we'll take care of you. It's going to be fine. We have your back. We have your back if you go to war with Russia, and we have your back for the economy. Meanwhile, you know, what happens is that Ukraine ends up in massive debt to the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, which is an American-sponsored entity, which basically means that, yeah, you can borrow money to support your infrastructure, but that's going to mean you're going to have to privatize it and sell it off in order to pay back your debt. So you end up losing your sovereignty, right? So what Russia had always said was, look, we just need you to be neutral. You don't have to join our federation. You know, this is why the USSR granted them autonomy, but you can't join NATO or the EU. So all the problems started in 2014, primarily when the Ukrainian president Yanukovych said he was going to join the EU. And then he got pressure and he backtracked on it, and he got pressured by Russia, basically, and said, hey, that's going too far. We need you to be neutral because you're on our border. We can't have like NATO missiles at our border. And, it's not that far to Moscow from there. We already had a really bad experience in the 90s of being carved up by the West through these Russian oligarchs. And we almost lost our sovereignty. We can't have that. We need to have our sovereignty, and you're not going to cost us our sovereignty. The only condition that we have is that you remain neutral. But the U.S. convinced them to not be neutral because Ukraine is one of the most corrupt countries in the world, and you had people that were well paid to promote the idea that they should join the Western side. So you had this coup, and the people in the Donbass region in eastern Ukraine that borders Russia said, no, we feel threatened by this. We're not going to go along with it. Russia went into Crimea, which is also in the east and has a very important port to the, what's the sea there? The Black Sea, I think. And it was very important for their submarine bases, and they weren't going to give that up. Right. And that region was always very pro-Russian. They had a referendum there, and some say wasn't a legitimate referendum, but it was literally over 90% of the people said they wanted to rejoin the Russian Federation, which makes sense because in the eastern, like I said, in the eastern part, it's always been mostly ethnically Russian and pro-Russian, even though the Ukrainians had tried to propagandize that side to change it. It only had a limited effect. Those people's affiliation and their ethnic identity and their religion, the Orthodox religion, was very strong. And so Crimea was retaken by Russia, and then these republics said, we want to be autonomous. And now what's interesting is that Russia didn't just say, oh, okay, you can join the Federation. They were very cautious about even agreeing that these two regions that they call the Donbass, Luhansk, and Donetsk should be autonomous. But they didn't want to see those people get genocided, so they gave some material support to them as the Ukrainian military invaded. Well, Ukraine would say they didn't invade, it was part of Ukraine, but they were shelling civilians, they were torturing civilians. They've made life very difficult. And even to this day, during the war, they're still shelling urban civilian areas, non-military targets, right? The same thing that Russians are accused of bombing civilians in Ukraine, which they really have taken, extraordinary steps not to do that as much as possible. Why? Because they see Ukrainians as their people, right? They don't want to hurt ordinary Ukrainians. But as I said, the Ukrainian side, the propaganda is to see the Russians as subhuman, as orcs. And so they wantonly bomb civilian areas and drop mines that kids step on. It's really terrible. It's still going on. It hasn't been completely wiped out. So that's why Russia took this step, that they their objective, even with a relatively small force. So people don't understand, why do they go in with a small force? Well, the idea was that the Ukrainians would keep attacking them, and because the Russians have a big advantage in artillery, they could demilitarize Ukraine. That Ukraine would attack, and Russia would keep hitting them with artillery and grind down their forces. And in doing so, they would liberate the Donbass like they said they would. And that essentially is what happened. But there was a game changer, because Russia didn't anticipate that the West, the US and NATO, would provide so much support to the Ukrainians in terms of weapons and mercenaries, right? So the war, if that hadn't happened, the war would have been over in the summer. but it continued because of the billions of dollars of support and weapon systems that the Ukrainians received from the US and the West. But ironically, what all that's really doing is causing more casualties for Ukrainians, causing the war to continue that might have been stopped. There was efforts for negotiation in March, only like a month after the conflict started, the end of February. There was meetings in Turkey, high-level meetings between the Ukrainians and the Russians, and it appeared that the Ukrainians were willing to accept the Russian terms of neutrality and just allow the Donbass region to be autonomous, and essentially the war would have been over. But Boris Johnson, former Prime Minister of Britain, rushed in, most likely at the behest of the United States, and said, "There's no way you can negotiate. You can't. There's not going to be any peace. You have to just fight, keep fighting. Essentially fight to the last Ukrainian." The war really would have been over then. The Russians would have accepted that, it seems, and they didn't. So the war just carried on, and the casualties for Ukraine are enormous. It's funny because it's tragic, but in the Western media reports will say that 100,000 Russian soldiers have been lost, 100,000 Russian casualties. You have to keep in mind that the fighting in the Donbass is mostly by the Donbass militia, so it's people of that region, plus support from Russian forces. In total, the Russians, rough estimate is probably they've lost between the Russians and the militia, they've lost about 20,000 people, 20,000 men, soldiers, which isn't insignificant. But the Ukrainians have probably lost somewhere in the neighborhood of like 400,000 men. Like pretty much their entire army from that start of the war has been wiped out. They say that the Russians are bringing in conscripts, but it's actually the Ukrainians, and it's like teenagers and 60-year-olds and women, right, that are being sent to the front lines to basically be torn apart by artillery.
Yeah.
So anyway,
Right.
as far as the US goes, we said from the beginning, we said this was an unprovoked and unjustified war. I think I've just explained how it was justified from the Russian perspective, right? What we can talk about more is whether or not it was provoked. And we can look at some of those clips, and I think that'll make a pretty clear case that it was anything but unprovoked from the Russian side. It was very much provoked. The US wanted, the main objective was to go back to the situation in the 90s where the Russians were on the ropes and didn't have the same level of sovereignty, that we could take advantage of the resources that they have and divide Russia. And at the same time, another objective, and we'll see it with the clips, is that we wanted to take industry away from Western Europe and bring it to the United States. So we wanted to destroy European industry by destroying the energy flow that they were getting from Russia. That was that inexpensive Russian energy was propping up the quality of life in Europe in a way that US energy will never be able to do. They'll have to pay 4 times the price for natural gas that they were getting from Russia. And also they were getting inexpensive oil from Russia. And we see that with the blowing up of the pipeline, that, it's pretty obvious that the Americans were responsible for it. And that was because they want to cut off Europe's relationship with Russia, which again is stupid. Just like we said with Ukraine, when you're on, geography matters, right? Ukraine's on the border. Europe is part of Eurasia, right? You can't cut them off from Russia or even China, but let's just say Russia, right? Without cutting off your nose to spite your face. The US, which has an ocean between themselves and Europe, can't compete with Russia in terms of energy supply. I mean, they can, but the Europeans won't be able to fund their industry the same way. They won't be able to have the same quality of life. And that just proved that the war proves just how extensive the control that the US has had over Europe since the end of World War II. Like it really hasn't changed. It only had the appearance, Europe only had the appearance of sovereignty, but really it hasn't had it. And this war and what's been allowed to happen, I mean, the pipeline was blown up and no one in Europe is really complaining about it. And in Europe, the government leaders are sending all this money to Ukraine. They're going to have a refugee crisis. They already have a refugee crisis with refugees from the Middle East and Africa. Now you have a Ukraine refugee problem, and it's going to get 100 times worse because since the war has continued, Russia has been forced to destroy the infrastructure so that they can put a quicker end to the war. The US, when they do a war, they always do that first. They just destroy the infrastructure. They don't care how many civilians die because they know that militarily that's the way to win the war. Russians didn't do that because they cared about Ukrainians. They waited as long as they could. I know it sounds like, oh, well, I'm just making excuses for them. No, I mean, they waited 8-9 months to do that, hoping that they could use war as a way to negotiate. But the Americans don't want to negotiate. Why? They don't care about Ukraine. They don't care about Ukrainians. They're Ukrainians are like mice that you feed to the snake. Like they don't care about them. They're just there. They're there to be sacrificed, and Europeans are there to be sacrificed. We don't care about the Europeans either. We don't care about our allies. When I was looking at some of these clips today, in one of them, there was a very interesting quote that Kissinger had made that I had never heard before. He said that it can be dangerous to be a friend of America can be dangerous. No, sorry, I screwed up. To be an enemy of America can be dangerous, but to be a friend is fatal.
That says a lot.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, we're shooting ourselves in the foot to support these policies, this evil, immoral war, because we want regime change in Russia and because we want to bring industry back to the United States, not like the right way by just taking the time to develop it and to cultivate it, like Trump was trying to do when he was in office, but instead basically stealing it from Europe because we're making their economies less viable because we're increasing the price of energy for them to such a degree that they won't be able to compete.
Yeah, and I mean, Ukraine is really one of these money laundering, child trafficking capitals of the world, and there's
an
so
elite
much
playground.
It's an elite playground. It's really a deep state ground zero in many ways,
and a bio warfare center.
Right.
One of the clips I didn't get a chance to include was the questioning that Marco Rubio had for Victoria Nuland. He was asking her about the biolabs in Ukraine, and it is clear that they're nervous about that, about being discovered about that. I mean, Russia's already presented that to the UN, but it doesn't get any play in the mainstream media.
No, it doesn't, I'm sure.
You could think about COVID with that too, like
what I'm curious about your take is how, like where is Biden's quid pro quo fit into all this, and how is this conflict escalating as a result of what Biden's interest in the Ukraines are, and Hunter Biden, and being on these energy committees and things like that. Where does that play a role?
Yeah, well, do you want to play that clip and we
Yeah,
can,
I think we should play this clip, which I mean,
then we could talk about it a little more?
and I'm
Yes.
sure.
Certainly he has an interest in what happens a personal interest in what happens in Ukraine. And if you have a change of government there, there might be more secrets that can be revealed about his involvement.
Exactly. So this was back in 2016, and a lot of you have probably seen this clip, but I think we should touch on it again.
And think about who his audience is there, the Council of Foreign Relations.
Yeah,
That's
so
why he's so brazen about it. Like he doesn't care how gross it sounds, because his audience applauds that kind of behavior. This is, the elite controller people that are in attendance here, and they're minions.
And of course, there was nobody talking about this at the time that it happened. It kind of just happened, right under our noses. And it only became more relevant leading up to the 2020 election. And they tried to censor this information like hell, along with the Hunter Biden laptop.
That's right. Good point.
Considering that it all fits in. So in 2006, Ukrainian prosecutor Viktor Shokin, in his investigation of the corruption involving Burisma Holdings, a natural gas company, identified Hunter Biden as the recipient of over $3 million from the company. And then I think it just...
And he had no experience in energy.
Not wanting this corruption exposed, Joe Biden swung into action using U.S. loan guarantees as hostage while demanding Shokin be fired. Amazingly, Biden now brags about his actions in this matter.
I remember going over convincing our team or others to convincing us that we should be providing for loan guarantees. And I went over for, I guess, the 12th, 13th time to Kyiv, and I was supposed to announce that there was another $1 billion loan guarantee. And I had gotten a commitment from Poroshenko and from Yatsenyuk that they would take action against the state prosecutor, and they didn't. So they said they were walking out to press conference. I said, no, I said, we're not going to give you the $1 billion. They said, you have no authority. You're not the president. The president said. I said, call him. I said, I'm telling you, you're not getting the $1 billion. I said, you're not getting the $1 billion. I'm going to be leaving here. And I think it was, 6 hours? I said, I'm leaving in 6 hours. If the prosecutor's not fired, you're not getting the money. Well, son of a bitch. Got fired. And they put in place someone who was solid.
I mean, just openly bragging about it. I mean, if that isn't a quid pro quo, I don't know what is.
It's a quid pro quo, and also shows how much it shows. For one thing, it shows how much Ukraine was controlled by the United States, that the United States government could just say, hey, you have to fire this attorney general, right? Or else you're not getting this money. It also shows how low regard the US government had for Ukraine and Ukrainians, right? Like they just treated them like whores, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
We were the pimps and they were the whores, and it's like, oh, these dirty whores, they'll just do whatever we say for money, right? Like they thought so little of Ukraine, which it isn't surprising now when we're willing to sacrifice hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians and destroy their country for our own reasons, to destabilize Russia and to sell natural gas to Europe.
Yeah.
And take away European energy. That's it, and that's it. And these people that are there, they're applauding this and laughing, right? Because they feel the same way. the US as an empire should be doing things like this. And sovereignty for other countries don't matter.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah, when
you
you
don't
see
get to choose your attorney general. We choose your attorney general. You take orders from us. You're taking loans from us. We get to call the shots. So Ukraine isn't determining what's happening in this war. The US is determining it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we're pretty much already involved, and it's like a World War III scenario. We're just not officially involved in the war and having troops on the ground. But as it's been reported recently, there have actually been US troops coming into the Ukraine that are acting as advisors. And this is exactly what happened in the Vietnam War, you know, and how that escalated. So, you know,
And
I am
also they're
very,
operating these advanced weapon systems because
yeah,
there really isn't time. Since most of the original Ukrainian army has been destroyed, there's no time to train the Ukrainians on these advanced systems. It's going to be NATO mercenaries or NATO contractors. Sometimes they're Americans, sometimes they're, you know, from Western Europe, sometimes they're Romanians or Poles. There's been a lot of Polish mercenaries in this fight too, because they've been very pro-Ukrainian, which is ironic because historically Western Ukraine and the Poles have been at odds with each other. There was a lot of, just like there were a lot of massacres of Jews during World War II by
yeah,
Ukrainian nationals, there was a lot of mass murder of Poles too. So it is kind of surprising that the Poles would take that side so strongly, even though they have gripes against Russia too. But, you know, there's no reason for them to like trust the Ukrainians either. But again, you know, Poland
yeah,
also is part of the EU, they're part of NATO, and you know, they want to be good little soldiers,
right. Yeah, so it only
loyal.
makes sense that they get involved. Yeah.
And
I know it's
they'll suffer the worst from the migrant situation because they're on the border.
right, right, absolutely. Yeah, that's true.
Because, you know, I mean, it's winter time. The Ukrainians are going to be freezing and starving. They're not going to stay. It's mostly, you know, from Soviet times, they built all these high rises, right? So can you imagine being in a high rise without any heat during the winter, you know, and no food, no employment, no electricity, you know, the elevators don't work. I mean, they're
Yeah,
death traps, right? You're not going to stay there. You're going to flee the country.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, what do you,
It's
I mean, what do you,
terrible.
yeah, well, I mean, so what do you think globally is, you know,
Meanwhile,
can,
the West
can
says that Ukraine is winning the war, which is ridiculous. You know, they
yeah,
did have some battlefield success, like late summer. They had some counteroffensives that went well, but the thing that a lot of people don't realize is that they did recapture some territory, but the Russians aren't as concerned about territory as they are about demilitarization. So they don't care if the Ukrainians come to them. If the Ukrainian army gets destroyed, you can take as much territory as you want,
sure,
right? Because there's no way to stop it. So the Russians have time on their side. They're willing to let the Ukrainians come to them or stay in their positions where they can just bomb them with their artillery advantage. The Ukrainians are powerless right now in terms of air defense, and they really can't do anything in terms of attacking Russia through the air. And
yeah,
if they send these like human wave attacks, they just get slaughtered. But because Ukraine, when you look at the map, it's such a large territory, and Russia didn't commit a lot of troops to the fight, Ukraine was able to gain some ground using their numeric superiority in places that were lightly defended, right? The Russians basically conceded the territory, but in doing so, even though Russians conceded the territory, the Ukrainians took tremendous losses in regaining that territory. So in effect, it played into the Russians' objective, which is to demilitarize Ukraine. The other thing that we haven't really touched on, we don't have to get into it too much, but what is denazification? There's a history of collaboration between the Ukrainian side and the Nazi German side. And to this day, a lot of the anti-Russian propaganda has been through these far right ultra-nationalist groups, which use a lot of Nazi symbolism and have reputations for torture and things like this. And they were promoted institutionally within the government. So when you had the coup in 2014, these Nazi groups were promoted by the West to be more prevalent in government institutions and in the military.
Yeah, and how do they, like, how does the Western media justify like literal Nazis, fighting
Well,
for
they
Ukraine,
did have reports about it before February 24th, 2022.
Right,
But as
right.
soon as that started, it was like memory hold. And
Yeah, yeah,
they just try to pretend that it doesn't exist, or they minimize it.
sure.
They say, yeah, there's a few bad apples. There's white supremacists and Nazis in many countries, including Russia and the United States, So, but
Yeah,
in Ukraine, it's actually been fomented at the institutional level.
yeah. And they're, militaristic. I mean, there's
Yeah.
definitely like, I think there's always going to be this like fringe minority of, neo-Nazis, but for the most part, they peacefully protest. I mean, like you're looking at actual,
Institution
military.
level.
Yeah.
Yeah, they
So I
use
don't think
them
I don't think
like,
it gets that. I don't think it gets more extreme than that. So
yeah, and even like a guy like Zelensky, like he has people within his government who make sure that he doesn't go too far. Like, like, hey, if you negotiate with the Russians, we'll kill you. I mean, some of it comes to the United States, some of it comes from these ultra nationalists within Ukraine, right?
yeah,
That are enforcers and torturers and murderers, right?
yeah,
And work from via intimidation.
yeah, and I mean, Zelensky
And the
is,
US is responsible for that.
yeah, and I mean,
We
and also,
promoted those people. We worked with them because historically they were opposed to the Soviets, right? And we maintained that relationship since World War II.
sure, yeah, definitely, and I mean, I think, Zelensky is just really another puppet. I mean, he also has an acting background too.
Sure.
Like,
Well,
I mean,
what's interesting about Zelensky is that Poroshenko was, in fact, Biden even mentioned him. He was the president who was installed after the coup. And he ran against, Zelensky ran against him, I'm going to say, I think it was 2019. And Zelensky's main campaign promise that won him the election was that he promised to make peace with Russia, right? Because, he knew that that's what the people that a majority of people really wanted, even though there's this other side that's, like against Russia at all costs. Zelensky understood that the majority of Ukrainians had enough common sense to know that, like, it was suicidal to not try to make peace with Russia. Now, whether he ever intended to honor that, I don't know. He was actually from Eastern Ukraine and he speaks fluent Russian. That was, he spoke more Russian. I think he had to learn Ukrainian, like he grew up speaking Russian, which a lot of Ukrainians in the East do. But once he came to power, I think he was made to understand that that's not was going to happen, that it wasn't acceptable to make peace with Russia, because their government was not sovereign and it was hijacked both by these neo-Nazis and it was beholden to the Americans, who were their benefactors.
Yeah. No,
So, but it was clever, like that,
It sure
and
certainly is.
ironic,
Yeah.
right? And now, all he does is, trash Russia, which is kind of understandable given that, they're in a war, so it's wartime propaganda. And of course, for anybody who doesn't know, he got rid of all the alternative media. There's only one media source, and there's no government opposition. So, where's the dictatorship? Is it Russia or is it Ukraine? And, as far as that goes, a lot of people say, well, Russia, it's a dictatorship, it's autocracy. Well, I think that, I mean, we technically live in a democracy, but how much influence do we really have over, the decisions that are being made in Washington? It seems like they're being made really without regard to what the people actually want. So, so we're also living in a dictatorship, just in a different form. But what matters most is sovereignty, right? We may not be able to change the form of the government, but the important thing for the people is whether or not they're sovereign. Look, Ukraine doesn't have sovereignty, they're getting destroyed. Russia's not getting destroyed. Russia was able to endure these sanctions, right? They had so many economic sanctions levied against them, but they have commodities, and they've been smart and recognized that they were going to do everything they could, especially since 2000, when Putin came to power, that they were going to maintain their sovereignty because they had seen what it was like when they almost lost it. And China's the same way. China, we may not like their form of government, we may not like communism, right? But at the same time, China is maintaining its sovereignty. This war has shown that they too are not really part of the globalist project. They want to do business with everybody, but they're not aligned with the WEF, and they're not aligned with the empire, right? I mean, they obviously want to protect their borders and have strong trading relationships with everybody in their, most of all within their region, but why not with other countries in the world that want to trade with them? And they don't have bases, military bases all over the world the way the United States does, nor does Russia.
Yeah, and it definitely seems that, the EU, which is, in a sense, really like, the Communist Party controlling Europe, they want control over Russia as well. I mean, that's pretty much what it's coming down to. I think that's what we're seeing.
Sorry, can you repeat that again?
I think that what we're seeing is, the EU desperately wants control over Russia the way that the Soviet Union had control over Russia at one point.
Well, the EU, yeah, I mean, the EU is comprised of unelected bureaucrats that can supersede the sovereignty of the individual nations, right? Meanwhile, at the same time, the EU is subservient to the Americans, and America is subservient to its globalist oligarchs. Ordinary Americans don't really see the benefits from American empire, right? But the oligarchs do. It's not helping us, which is again why we should be against this war. There you see a lot of talk about, we should be against American isolationists, right? Well, that's a way to smear people that are anti-war, that both from the right and the left, that see these foreign wars as debilitating and draining of our national treasure and lives. And why don't we focus on developing infrastructure the way China's doing, like, I mean, we can criticize again, like, we don't like communism, and, we don't like dictators for life. Like, we would sort of see with Xi, but like on the smaller level, local, state levels, man, you can't get away with corruption in China. You have to honor your campaign promises. You have to really help the people. And you can see the results there that they have developed their infrastructure. People's quality of life has improved, and we see the opposite here. We don't see our tax dollars being invested in much, if any, infrastructure. We don't see an effort by the politicians to, except maybe on the smallest levels, to try to improve the lives of their constituents. It's more like, how can we enrich ourselves and get the most out of public office for ourselves, and maybe in the best case where they want to do that, but they realize that they need so much money to be reelected that they spend most of their time fundraising and not trying to help their constituents, right? Because if they don't, they're going to lose the elections because they can't win without millions and millions of dollars. And it's not like that in China. In China, like, and here, most of the politicians, at the higher levels, higher state and national levels, are lawyers. In China, they're engineers. The majority are engineers.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point you make, how China is really, like, they have way more of their shit together than us, and they're really on a fast track right now to becoming a much stronger country than America.
Yeah, and because the government there actually has to be accountable to the people.
Yes. Yeah, I mean it really is like a people's republic, even though it's communist. It's it does.
And we can find plenty of fault. I mean, we don't like their zero COVID policies. Even the Chinese don't like their zero COVID policies. Some of those protests were organic, but here's the difference: the government actually listened and has made some adjustments.
Right.
Like, and who knows? Maybe the Chinese government, maybe they know something we don't. Maybe there were bioweapons being used against them, or the threat of it, and they had to take these very extreme measures to counter it, just to make sure that either they didn't have mass deaths, or that their whole like hospital system did break down, because people are paranoid, right? So if people think they might get COVID and they get the flu, then they're flooding the hospitals, right? And people can't get treated for regular illnesses.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no. And it's the direction that they're going in. It's unpredictable, but it looks a lot better than where we are right now, for sure.
Yeah. And the deals that they offer other countries are like, yeah, of course, like they see like, hey, if we help another country develop their infrastructure, we're going to have a better chance of doing better deals with them and have more favorable conditions for advantages in the business that's going to develop as a result of this infrastructure, right? Like they're building rail and road links between them and like Laos and Cambodia and Vietnam, and all that creates benefits both for those countries, Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, and also for China, right? So why don't we do the same things like in Latin America? We could be doing all that, but instead, we're clinging to this rules-based order where we make the rules and everybody else has to follow it. We're the sole unipolar power, and you're gonna do what we say because we're the strongest military power, and we can levy sanctions against you if you disobey, you don't support our policy, you don't support the war in Ukraine, so on and so forth, right? That's not what China's doing.
No.
China just says, hey, we want to do business with you. You want to do business with us? Here's our terms, and you negotiate and you find terms that are, usually you're not going to make a deal unless both sides see it as mutually beneficial, right? I
No,
did,
yeah,
enough
doubt.
business in Taiwan. With the Chinese mindset is, mutual benefit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
And
that's
unfortunately, since
what
World War
works.
II and
Yeah.
since the end of the Soviet Union, where we believe that we won the Cold War, right? We're just saying, hey, we don't do negotiations anymore. You do what we say because we're the most powerful. We don't negotiate. It's like the mafia. They're not going to negotiate with anyone. They have the threat of the gun, right? And they say, do what we say or risk the consequences.
Exactly. Exactly.
I mean, it's sad that that's where we're at, but that is where, and we're clinging to it. And
Yes.
if we just would put that energy into our own development and to doing like making deals the way the Chinese are making deals, and say, hey, let's do something that's good for you, good for us, where we can both develop, where we promote your sovereignty, right? Where we're not trying to control you. We just want the best for you so that we can grow together and help your people, help our people. Look, and I'm not saying the Chinese are totally innocent and they're always, thinking about the other guys so much, but like it's also not military domination, right? That's the
Mhm.
difference.
Sure.
But China does have a very powerful military defense. Like they have hypersonic missile technology that we don't have yet. So do the Russians. They could, in the past, that was when that technology advantage didn't exist. Our naval fleet was a lot more powerful and a lot less vulnerable. Now, if we send our aircraft carriers, they could be destroyed by hypersonic missiles that we have no defense for. So we can't project the same sea power. We still have a very powerful Navy. We have a very powerful submarine force. Like the Chinese and the Russians don't want to have a war with us. And that's why you're not seeing any direct wars. You're seeing proxy wars. So Ukraine is a proxy war. They want to do the same thing in Taiwan, make Taiwan, go to war with China the way that Ukraine did. But as you saw from these local elections, the Taiwanese aren't going along with it. They're like, no, we're seeing what's going on with Ukraine. Their country's being destroyed. I think we'll opt for not provoking China into attacking us. I mean, they know that they're still part of China, and China would allow them to have like a strong degree of sovereignty if they don't, if they don't declare independence, and force the issue.
Do you think it's possible there could be a war with China and Taiwan?
Yeah, but I think China, it's possible, but like this whole thing with Pelosi visiting was very provocative, but China doesn't need to do that because they know that geographically Taiwan is right there. They're right at their doorstep. So all they have to do is wait. They already do a lot of business with Taiwan. Taiwan depends on China economically. China doesn't depend on Taiwan economically. So they have a lot of power. They have a lot of leverage over Taiwan if Taiwan does things that China doesn't want, which is only one thing, which is not to declare independence.
Mm. Yeah, that's probably true for sure. Maybe we could get my girlfriend Karu to come on and speak a little bit about this issue. I know you have some questions for her. So maybe we could just pause for a few seconds and I will.
All right. Do you want to, are we wrapped up on Ukraine? Did you want to look at any of those clips, or are we kind of like going overtime here?
I would say, yeah, we're at about an hour and 40 minutes. So for the last 20 minutes of our show, so that this is 2 hours, I think we'll bring Karu on to discuss those. And
before she goes to bed.
maybe we'll catch up on the next, in the next show about more
Sounds good.
Ukraine topics. So all right. All right, Karu, if you want to come on. So, and maybe you can just take my spot.
I'll take your spot.
Yeah.
Oh, no,
Can you guys both be in the frame?
We both.
Okay.
Well, I have mic'd.
All right. So yeah.
Hey, nice to meet you, Dylan's girlfriend.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
First time ever.
So this is Karo. This is my girlfriend, and we we talk a lot about politics, but we do talk about China and Taiwan a lot. And growing up in Taiwan, I think getting to know the people and the culture and their relationship to China. What are your thoughts on the possibility of a war between these two countries?
Yeah, I lived in Taiwan right before the pandemic. I actually, have the citizenship as well. But I've never I lived there for around 5 years. And I actually was right around the time when, the elections were kind of underway in America. I was like, all my students in Taiwan became kind of Trump supporters overnight. And I couldn't understand it. And it was really more because of their fear of something happening with China. They're seeing them they've been seeing them as a threat, but then at the same time, they don't want to get into anything with them. They understand that they're in a much more weaker position. If China was to ever attack or to do, to try to claim Taiwan as theirs, they really don't have much say in the matter. But they just kind of, they don't want to push it. They just want to keep things as they are. They feel America has been an ally, that they're in a position, like geographically as the country that makes them, very important to like be on America's side. They feel America can protect them. But then as China is growing, more and more and stronger, and then they're seeing kind of what's going on during the pandemic, what happened with Taiwan, with Hong Kong. They really see Hong Kong as sort of like, oh, this is maybe what's coming for us. But at the same time, they've been sort of fearful for such a long time. There's a bit of like, what are we going to do anyways? But yeah, let's just not touch it. Let's like just keep China happy. Let's just, and when I talk with people from China, I always have to kind of remind myself, okay, they think of Taiwan as, just like a province. So it's like a bizarre kind of, you have to pretend like we act like we have our own country, like we have our own currency, government, and we're usually just think of ourselves as independent. But then it's like when a person from China is in the room, we just kind of remind myself, okay, we gotta remember we're part of China, So it's like we don't really, we try to just, I think on a day-to-day basis, we just act like we're just independent from China. But then it's it's one of those things in the back of everyone's mind, I think. So
yeah.
Like,
no,
and
the prime minister Tsai Ing-wen stepped down because of election issues, or I forgot what exactly it was.
Do you want to play that clip?
Yes.
I'll just say that, maybe before you start that, Dylan, that
yeah,
I have a special interest in Taiwan because I studied Chinese when I was in college, and my first study abroad was in Taiwan, and then I went back and I had a consulting business in Taiwan. So, and I had a great experience there. And so in a way, I've always had a bias towards Taiwan in this, conflict with China. But recently I've come to understand that, that it's important to really see both sides of that issue. And there's a lot to say for, supporting China for certain things, and supporting, for certain things that China does well and certain things that Taiwan does well. And I want to see both of those nations thrive. And I understand that it's delicate, that Taiwan is on China's doorstep, has historically been part of China, but it's also had some independence from China. But if they declare independence, that's crossing a red line. And I don't want to see Taiwanese people get hurt and unnecessarily. But I realize, nationalism is a strong impulse. We have it in the United States. People have it everywhere. It's understandable that Taiwanese would want to, many Taiwanese can identify as something separate from China, and yet so many Taiwanese consider themselves ethnically Chinese. So it's a balancing act that I think they've done a good job of maintaining, even with all the swirling geopolitical forces that have tried to really, put the two groups at odds. But at the end of the day, I think that, like, Taiwanese aren't stupid. They see what's happened in Ukraine. They don't want that for their country. They don't want war with China. They know that if China wanted to invade, they could, but China doesn't want to do that either. Just like Russia took every step to not invade Ukraine. China doesn't want to do that with Taiwan. And the Taiwanese have benefited for a long time by just having this status quo where they could travel to China, do business with China. Both countries could benefit from that. And that over time, they would become more integrated and they would work out the details of that among themselves, not with a country that was on the other side of the globe that has to project its power across the entire Pacific Ocean.
Yeah, I mean, whatever, it's so much of Taiwan politics is it just hinges on China. So it's
and it has to look at the geography.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Can't change that.
Exactly.
They can't move it.
Right. Exactly.
All right, let's see the clip, Dylan.
Okay. All right. So Taiwan President Tsai Ing-wen. Oops, gotta turn this on. Taiwan President Tsai Ing-wen resigned as head of the ruling Democratic Progressive Party on Saturday following local election losses. Tsai had tried to frame the elections as more than just a local vote, saying the world is watching how Taiwan defends its democracy amid tensions with China, which claims the island as its territory. But her strategy failed to win public support, and at a press conference, Tsai took responsibility for the losses.
We were unable to break through the current makeup of local politics. This shows that we have not met expectations of the people when it comes to running municipalities.
The local elections for mayors, county chiefs, and local councillors are typically about domestic issues like health crisis restrictions and crime. The main opposition party, the Kuomintang, or KMT, was leading or claimed victory in 13 of the 21 city mayor and county chief seats up for grabs, including the capital Taipei. The KMT has accused Tsai and the DPP of being overly confrontational with China.
It's not like the DPP has never failed or fallen before. We will conduct thorough reviews. The more the people expect from us, the better we have to perform.
Focus will now turn to the 2024 presidential and parliament election, which Tsai and the DPP won by a landslide in 2020 on a pledge to stand up to China and defend Taiwan's freedoms. Tsai, who will continue serving as president until 2024, cannot run again because of term limits. So
It's crazy.
yeah.
Yeah.
So what do you think this means for like the future leadership of Taiwan?
Oh, me?
Do you have it? I mean,
yeah, it's crazy because what I've seen Tsai Ing-wen for, she got reelected, and I think a lot of people.
What year did she come to power through, more or less? She's been in power for how long?
This is her second term. Like
this is her second term. Okay.
Yeah. So that's kind of
about 8 years, 6 to 8 years. Yeah.
Exactly. It's been a while. And so and I feel a lot of people during the elections, I felt everyone was also kind of, not too happy with the political kind of, situation there. Everyone was like, there wasn't really good leadership. But then I thought everyone was very happy with the way she dealt with COVID. Taiwan was very much a poster child for the world. But then obviously there was like that tension again, once again, not being really acknowledged as its own country, or even being acknowledged at all in China's eyes. I'm surprised, but then I'm surprised but not surprised. There's always this back and forth between like what they can do, what can they say and do when China's watching. So yeah, it's crazy to see.
Do you think that like what she said with her words there was that what is telling, I thought, like about what Taiwanese people, and I think Chinese people in China too, expect from their leadership, that they're going to take care of the domestic issues, the healthcare issues, crime, things of that nature, right? Economy. But at the same time, the presenter said that their main focus was on the relations with China and independence. And we saw, they invited Pelosi. They were clearly like willing to take these provocative actions. So on the one hand, she's saying how important the domestic issues are, for their government. And on the other hand, it seemed that her priorities were the foreign international issues. And it appears that really costed them in the elections, right?
Oh yeah,
that the two were not reconciled.
It's always this back and forth, like whether or not you poke the dragon or not, and maybe they felt that she definitely comes from the party that believes in a more independent Taiwan. And it's always just a delicate balance. Like, people don't want to piss them off at this, and they're also, they're economically dependent on them in many ways. But China is obviously a growing power. So I don't. She maybe.
Have you ever heard people and Taiwanese people talk about how maybe there's been a change in the education system in Taiwan that over the years has pushed more of the independent agenda and in the media as well?
Right. I mean, I think there were protests about that a while ago. Because like all the things that happen in Hong Kong is just Taiwan. People in Taiwan really watches that like a hawk, because they see like and then there is a certain level of censorship that they have to deal with too. They have to appease China. So yeah,
I heard that before the Hong Kong. Sorry to interrupt, but I heard that like before the Hong Kong, the umbrella revolution, big major Hong Kong protests, which I think were 2019, that China and Taiwan were very close to making like kind of a agreement, security arrangement that they would kind of unify, but Taiwan would have a lot of independence. They could run everything themselves. But when all the shit went down with Hong Kong, then they swung over to the other side, saying, no, we can't do that. And a lot of people are saying that was by design, that the Hong Kong protests were timed in order for Taiwanese people to say like, oh wait, we don't want this agreement with China. And it got, so, this is like CIA type of, US intel shenanigans going on in the region, which happens in Hong Kong, happens in Taiwan, happens in Thailand, happens throughout the region, right? Even the recent protests in China, not all of it was organic.
Right. I mean, what's interesting when I talk to people in Taiwan and China is this understanding that China can do anything it wants at any time. So it's very like it's almost like overly emotional kind of, I don't know, parent that they just have to appease. It's really bizarre for me to, because I mean, I guess it's getting less and less bizarre because our politics and our reality is also very, kind of, it's more shrouded in mystery, I think, in America, right? There's a lot of cloak and daggers. It's like I was, kind of blind. I was just I was just ignorant about what was going on. Whereas in China, it's so blatant and in your face, the censorship and the, kind of their tactics, the propaganda. And in a way, it's like by seeing the way China operates and just seeing now certain things happening in America that reminds me of China, that's where I was like, oh, I could see them kind of it's very similar, just they're going from opposite directions. Like when I was in China, I was
In China,
talking
it seems it's more blatant, and here
Yeah.
it's like they pretend they're not doing it, but they're really doing it.
Right, like the most obvious one is censorship. They're saying, I was like saying, how can you be okay with living in a place where the government is censoring you? They're like, come on, you don't think they're censoring you in America? They're doing the same thing. At least it's it's more obvious here, and then they're right, and they actually think in many ways that they're very free. They have I know a lot of people in China that were very supportive of Xi Jinping, given that he brought so many people out of poverty, made a larger, middle class and everything like that. But you kind of see, well, the totalitarianism, their reach is getting, their desire for power and control is getting greater and greater. And I sort of think that's what, naturally happens when you're dealing with totalitarian governments. And, that's why we have to be so.
It's true.
We have to,
Well, I think the Chinese are accustomed to state-run media, right? And that they know that the media is going to be a mouthpiece for the government. The government doesn't even try to hide that, right? So
Right.
they can take the government state-run media with a grain of salt, right? Whereas here, the people are programmed to think, oh, this is independent media. The mainstream media is independent of the government. And so, they just, they wouldn't profit if they don't tell the truth, because people would say that they're a liar. So, but in fact, it's totally infiltrated by the government, both like newspapers, TV, and big tech, right? So
Twitter files,
but they
show
don't,
that.
but they don't admit it. At least in China and like former Soviet, you knew what was state-run media, and you could weigh that and say, okay, this is the message the government's trying to send, and I get it. This is what they want, Whereas we try to hide it and behind these, private companies that are in partnership with the government, which is fascist.
Right. I mean, I was just kind of going through the Twitter files, the number 7, we're at 7 now.
Was that the Hunter Biden?
Hunter Biden, and then number 6 as well, that drop that happened. It just shows you how closely affiliated the FBI is with, Twitter, and even Mark Zuckerberg was on the Joe Rogan podcast saying how the FBI also directly contacted Facebook. So it's happened with all these social media companies.
Yeah, so we should just have state-run media like they have in China. So at least we know, okay, this is their position, and then actually like have real media, real independent media that will give a different angle, and that isn't part of the government.
Right. I mean, now it's sort of, I think these Twitter files just exhibited it very clearly that we're very similar to China. Like, unfortunately, we are being censored and the media is being controlled.
It's the same thing.
It also makes you think like it's probably that way all over the world.
Yeah.
So, and then it was, I think COVID was just a real eye opener for so many people, because this is the first thing that we saw that's global, like affect every single person in the world. And then you realize all the narrative is something that every country around the world just, bought into hook, line, and sinker, 24/7. Pretty much.
And
just
how much should we,
24/7.
how much now that we know what we know, should we trust the narrative that China started it, right?
Right.
I mean, that's like,
I-
the sort of like alternative media darling story, it's like, like our own government isn't accusing China, but they kind of do, right? Without wanting to really get to the origin of it. So, like at the end of the day, which is more likely? Is it China that started the whole COVID thing, or would it be the West that's projecting its power around the globe and trying to desperately to hold on to this power, and that has biolabs in Ukraine? Where's China's foreign biolabs? I don't see any, and you could, and even this zero COVID policy with China, like we don't like it, we don't like that kind of thing. But I'd say, does that really suggest that they started it? Probably not. So whatever it is, and it could just be a narrative, right? And nothing else, to make people panic. And, I tend to think it's, let's say 99% narrative and 1% bioweapon, So some places they're going to have some real, nasty shit that gets put into the pot. But I think most of the time the delivery system is the vaccines, right? Whatever really nasty shit's gonna be used as a vector to get people sick, right? Or kill people, and it would make more sense to me that, that the US in its own bio warfare programs, which it's had and it has and has had for a long time, would try to find ways to target Russian and Chinese / Asian genomes, right? Because they see Russia and China as the primary threat to their, continued unipolar hegemony.
Right.
And
it's
I don't see China and Russia trying to do the same thing to the West.
Right.
I see them wanting to maintain their sovereignty and have good and have strong, a strong position in their region, right? Because they're large countries and they have larger populations that they need to take care of and so on. They're not looking for territorial expansion the way that the US seems to want to make colonies out of other nations.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's sad to say because we're Americans and we don't want that,
Right.
We want America to focus on America and on Americans. And, that in my book, I said, like, we want to see America first. We want to see Canada first. We want to see France first. We don't want this New World Order, transnational cosmopolitanism, like where borders aren't respected and national identities and traditions aren't respected. We want that for everybody, and then everybody can make bilateral deals with each other to trade and promote growth and sovereignty.
Right.
Yeah, well, it'll be interesting to see what lies ahead. Absolutely.
And it's also wild to think that maybe, because I feel this is the first time in a long while that we really get to see how with technology and with social media, we are the journalists now, and seeing how the narrative is formed. All these things that I always just took for as truth from, what I read in history books and all that stuff, it just makes you wonder and question everything, because it's like, if they could be lying like this for, this entire, for this long, it just kind of makes you wonder how, like, what the narrative is, even if the narrative is correct in all of human history, which clearly it wouldn't be. It's not. It's always, history is written by the victors. And so it just makes you wonder what is true, what's reality. it's a really interesting time to be alive.
And fake
Certainly is.
news over time equals fake history, right?
Yeah, it makes you just question everything and the people, because I think, especially just the nature of human beings, we're so vulnerable when we're born. We have to be so dependent on our parents in comparison to other species, like a cow, they born, they can immediately walk up and, and they're way more self-sufficient than us humans. We're so vulnerable in that way. And so we take so much as like on face value. We I think our species is so dependent on trusting one another. And then when we got to a point, I think we're at this point in this really important juncture in human history where we're seeing like, wow, all these things that we've taken as truths is a lie. And it really, I think, it's shaking a lot. Shook me. I think it shook a lot of people. But then I think it's also there's a huge opportunity at this juncture, and like I think now
and that's why they're trying to control the narrative, because they know that the cat's out of the bag, right? They can't put it back in, but the only thing they can do is to amplify their narrative and mute the alternatives.
Right.
Exactly.
And curtail debate.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Karu, for sharing your thoughts. And I really think that was an interesting talk that we had today. So I look forward to getting more into Russia, Ukraine, and whatever's current for next week. And and thank you, Dad, for coming on as well. So
anytime, son. Anytime.
All right.
Good to see you, Karu.
All right. Okay.
All right. I'll talk to you guys soon.
Talk to you soon. See everyone next time.
All right.
Take care.